Now we are going to carve upper permanent first molar. First, we are going to measure the crown length from the 4 aspects of the wax block. Continue these lines together. Then measure just 5 millimeters for the root portion. A midline is drawn on 2 opposite surfaces. Select any 2 opposite surfaces and draw a midline on these surfaces. Minimum width is measured cervically, and the maximum width should be measured on the mesial and distal slopes. The mesial slope is taken away from the occlusal plane by just 2 millimeters. Over this line that represents the mesial slope, we will take the maximum width. The mesial slope should be connected on the mesial surface buccally and lingually. Also, the distal slope is measured away from the occlusal plane by 3 millimeters and connected it from the distal surface to the buccal half and the lingual half. On these cusp slopes, we measure the maximum width and take points. The occlusal outline is taken by measuring intercuspal distance, which is 6 millimeters, divided evenly on the midline. Then we communicate these points, the minimum width with the maximum width and the intercuspal distance, both mesially and distally. Then 2 parallel lines for the root portion were drawn. We have to communicate from the buccal and lingual surface the intercuspal distance to assure centralization of the tooth. Again, the steps are repeated, measuring minimum width, maximum width, and communicate these points together with the intercuspal distance. A trapezoidal shape is created. Then the 2 parallel lines of the root were drawn. After that, we have to cut gently at 3 levels. First, the slope should be cut like that. Make it smooth surface. The cutting taking outward direction. After finishing the slope, the measuring point of the maximum width will be obvious on the surface. Communicate these points together gently, then cut inward to create the outline of the crown. By this way, you will assure the level of the slope to be all of the time as you measured from the first step, creating very smooth surface directed inward. Then the root portion is cut. Be assured that every surface is smooth and clean. After finishing the 3 levels, we have to return the crown length again, directed to the other side, cutting the slope buccally and lingually, communicating these cuts. the direction of the cutting is outward, clean the surface, smooth it till you gain the maximum width points to the surface, measuring, communicating these maximum widths together to assure the level of the slope to be all of the time at the same level. Then cut inward. Of course, we are directing the lines that were drawn before, cleaning the surface and let it very smooth like that. Pay attention to the direction of the level. In this area we direct the knife inward. After that, the root portion should be cut. Smoothen the surface and clean it. Again, return the crown length to keep the crown all of the time with the same measurement as done as the first step. Second step, we creating the mesial and distal surfaces. Draw midline mesially and distally. Here we have to determine the buccal and lingual surface, which occurred haphazardly. Any surface you can select it as a buccal or lingual. From the buccal surface, we measure the cervical third and put a line to determine the presence of the future cervical ridge. Here we are. The maximum convexity will be as a cervical third on the buccal surface. Lingually, we measure half the crown and communicate this line mesially and distally. Thus we have different levels to put on it the maximum thickness. Measuring the minimum thickness cervically, then the maximum thickness will be divided unequally. Buccally will be at the cervical third, lingually will be at the middle of the crown. Of course, we have also here the intercuspal distance, which is also 6 millimeters divided evenly around the midline. Communicating the lines, the measuring points. By this way, we create the cervical ridge, getting over the cusp slopes gently. Here we are drawing the lingual surface with the maximum convexity at the middle of the crown, then parallel outlines for the root portion. Same steps should be repeated on the other side, other proximal side. Here's minimum thickness cervically, maximum thickness at the middle of the surface lingually, as the cervical third buccally, communicating the whole points, creating trapezoidal shape, but here the trapezoidal with narrowest surface occlusally, which is the opposite of the facial trapezoidal surface. Cutting also at 3 levels. Outward cut will be done. Follow the drawn lines. Here we have the maximum thickness points getting on the surface. Gentle communication of these points, then cutting inward to create the cervical ridge. Be assured that all the surfaces should be smooth and clean before cutting other surface. Then the root portion before going to the other surface. going to the other surface, repeating the same steps, but the maximum convexity will be in the middle. Here we have to return the crown length before going to the lingual surface, cutting in 3 planes again, outward direction, smoothing the surface, clean it carefully till reaching the maximum thickness points. Communicate these points together. Here you will assure the level of the maximum convexity doesn't change all over the carving steps. Cutting inward, creating the maximum convexity by this way. Similar steps that occurred buccally but with different only levels. The root portion again is cut, returning the crown length. By this way we getting the whole surfaces, facial, lingual, mesial and distal. Third step, we will do the convergence, which is the distobuccal convergence. To perform distal reduction or distal surface reduction, we should cut from the buccal surface. The cutting of the buccal surface will be above the cervical ridge, reaching the midline from the buccal surface till just 1 millimeter distally. The cutting just 1 millimeter towards the distal surface, smoothing the cervical ridge, keep its level and keep its presence. By this way we reduce the distal surface. From the distal surface we have to cut from the midline towards the buccal surface, keep the slope level. You have to cut away from the slope level. Cutting distally towards the buccal surface, you reduce the buccal surface, and cutting from the buccal surface towards the distal surface, you reduce the distal aspect. Returning again the crown length. By this way we create the first obtuse angle of the crown. Roundation to the opposite angle, which is the mesiolingual angle. By this way we create 2 obtuse angles opposing to each other. Now we are going to carve the occlusal surface. After distobuccal convergence, the midline wasn't centralized, thus we are creating a central line that should be tilted towards the lingual surface parallel to the buccal surface after distobuccal convergence. On this new midline that was created, we carve the triangular fossae mesially and distally, then make gentle separation between buccal cusps and lingual cusps. Pay attention that the knife that you are separating the surfaces should be parallel to the buccal surface, meaning that tilted towards the lingual surface. After separation buccal and lingual aspects, we have to separate the buccal cusps and lingual cusps. From each side, lingually and buccally, we have to make separating line between mesiolingual cusp and distolingual cusp. Of course, the mesiolingual cusp will be bigger, thus the separating line will be away from the midline just by 1 millimeter. After that, we should centralize the distance of the mesiolingual and distolingual cusps, creating V-shaped notch. By this way, reaching the line that we take it before, which unevenly separating the cusps. buccally we have to draw a central line but not even, directing slowly just 1 millimeter away from the midline towards the distal, reducing the bulk of the distobuccal. Mid points to each cusp should be done. From these midpoints, a V shape created, and these V shape lines should be removed, separating both buccal cusps away from each other, making distobuccal smaller than the mesiobuccal. By this way, we separate the two buccal from two lingual, and then separate the distobuccal from the mesiobuccal, and distolingual from mesiolingual. We have 4 cusp tips, as you see. The cusps that communicate with oblique ridge, which is the mesiolingual and distobuccal, should draw 2 parallel lines from the cusp tip towards the center of the tooth. Then gentle removal to the wax mesially and distally, creating triangular ridge, but giving central bulk for the oblique ridge. As you see, the triangular ridge directed towards the center of the crown. The opposite cusp, which is the distobuccal, draw 2 parallel lines, gentle removal mesially and distally to create the triangular ridge, with thickness centrally that will be the oblique ridge later on. The cusps away from the oblique ridge, as the distolingual, its triangular ridge will be directed forward, not to the center of the tooth, as that was occurred to the other cusps. Gentle removal mesially and distally to create the triangular ridge. Again, the triangular ridge should be looking towards the opposite surface, not to the center of the tooth. Mesiobuccal cusp, again, draw a mid line directed forward, gentle removal mesial and distal to create the triangular ridge. By this way, the oblique ridge created between the mesiolingual and distobuccal cusps. The central developmental groove is accentuated between the mesial triangular fossa and central fossa. This groove, accentuated by the tip of the carver, taking right angle with the buccal groove, accentuation to the triangular ridges occur, arising from the central and buccal developmental grooves towards the created triangular ridges before. Just accentuation to the carved areas. Here we accentuate the triangular ridge of the mesiolingual cusp. Take care and pay attention for the oblique ridge. Distally, here we accentuate the buccal developmental groove, accentuation to the marginal ridge that occurred distolingually, communicating the distal triangular fossa with developmental groove that extend lingually between the two lingual cusps, and creating the lingual developmental groove, carving to this lingual developmental groove, and then gentle accentuation to the triangular ridges and oblique ridge from the distal side. Accentuation to the triangular ridges and accentuation to the oblique ridge. Pay attention that the oblique ridge should be depressed centrally in the shape of a V shape. Finally, we draw a crescent shape or semicircle on the largest cusp, which is mesiolingual, just above the maximum convexity and below the cusp tip of the mesiolingual cusp. That will be the tubercle. This cusp of Carabelli should be accentuated by gentle removal of the wax occlusal to the line that was drawn before. Accentuation to the tubercle by this way. Roundation to the whole line angles, keeping whole anatomical landmarks, keeping cervical ridge, maximum convexity, slopes, and finally we draw the cervical line that is convex buccally and lingually, gentle convexity mesially, convex root-wise lingually, and straight distally. After drawing these lines, accentuate these lines and communicate them 2 or 3 times, then gentle removal of the wax from the root towards the drawn line will carve the cervical line by this way. Smoothing to the surface, removal of extra wax, cleaning to the surfaces. As we see here, the distal-buccal convergence obvious, the buccal surface and distal surface very clear to be smaller than the opposite surfaces. Accentuation to the triangular ridges, marginal ridge, central developmental groove, lingual groove, and distal developmental groove, distal triangular ridge. Pay attention to the direction of the triangular ridges that communicate with the oblique ridge facing to each other, while the other cusps face forward to each surface. Let's say the distolingual